Alaska is facing some budget problems due, of course, to the fluctuations in the prices of oil. And it's really kind of impacting their industries, and it's also impacting revenue for the state. So lawmakers, obviously, in Alaska are going to try to find out some different ways to pad their budgets to fill one of their budget deficits. Now, first of all, how big of a budget deficit do they have in Alaska? Well, they're facing about a $4 billion budget deficit that they have to fill. Now, how are they going to do this? Well, there are some suggestions going around. Democrats, of course, are saying maybe we should raise taxes on oil companies. Maybe we should just raise taxes on people who are wealthy. Some Republicans are saying, well, we should cut essential services. And there's another Republican who has got a slightly different idea. And this Republican is named Click Bishop. Only in Alaska will you find somebody named Click. He's a Republican state senator from the Fairbanks region, and he wants to solve this budget problem by creating a new tax on the poor. Now, this is according to the Alaska Dispatch News. Bishop basically came up with the law. He filed Senate Bill 97 to create what he calls an education tax. Now, what would this education tax actually do? Well, basically, it would tax anyone making $10,000 or more annually at a rate of $100. Now, this rate is progressive. It goes up. Actually, it's regressive, and I'll explain why. So this tax would hit people making $10,000 a year with about $100 at a rate of $100. The rate goes up to $200 for people who make $50,000 or more annually, and the rate would be capped, and this is the interesting part. They would cap this rate at $500 for earners who make about $500,000 annually or more. So if you're a wealthy person, your limit, your cap that you have to pay in this education tax is $500. Well, how does that break down? How does that affect people who are at the lower income spectrum? Well, this basically, the Alaska Dispatch answered that question and noted that, quote, this means people who earn about $10,000 would be forced to pay a tax representing 1% of their annual income, while those who make more than $500,000 would pay no more than 0.1% of their income annually. Now, that's a pretty big difference, and that's why this tax is regressive. This tax hits poor people much harder. Now, as I've noted before, poorer people pay more of a share of their income just to be able to get the basics to survive. Food and housing. And of course, heat, electricity, the basics, the very basics needed for human survival, poor people spend more of their money on. Somewhere around 77% of their monthly budget goes to just basic survival. Now you're adding a tax on this one, but that's not the worst part of this tax. The worst part, and the thing that would really, really hurt, is that half of these annual taxes would be withheld from workers' first 2 paychecks of the year. Now you're expecting a good paycheck at the beginning of the year, you're going to be sadly disappointed. Because this will obviously take a lot of money from somebody. Let me get into what it says. Now, an employee, for example, with an annual salary of about $10,000, one who would be affected the most, that equals about $386 weekly, could get hit with a 15% cut in take-home pay for the first 2 weeks of the year. That is disastrous. That is the difference between being able to put food on the table a month in that first month and paying this tax. And once again, I have to point out how people that are making $500,000 or more are capped at $500 or 0.1% of their income. Now remember, as I pointed out, people who are wealthier have more money to be able to devote to, basic survival. And it takes a lesser share of their income from those daily survival items. They spend less of a share of their income on it because they have much more resources. They have a lot more resources and they have a lot more income. They spend less of their income as a share on the basics for survival, which means they have more elective money to spend on other things. So they're getting hit with a tax that affects them much, much less than somebody who's making 10 grand a year in order to fill this budget hole. Now, this education tax is expected to raise about $40 million to around $160 million annually. Now, this is bad news for anybody who's poor in Alaska. Now, I'm not sure what the poverty rate is there, but I'm assuming it's high. There are people there that don't make very much money, and you decide you want to tax someone even more, who are, poor people. When you're trying to tax poor people more money, and you're actually trying to leave the rich out, and this is what they're doing. They're saying, don't worry, wealthy people. You're not going to get hit with a big tax. We got a cap. You're safe. You're not going to have to contribute more of your income to this education tax. Don't worry. I'm out here I'm looking out for you. I'm going to fill my budget hole on the backs of the poor. Because that's what we do here in Alaska. That's what we do here as Republicans. The current Republican Party has a war on the poor. There is a war on the poor. There's not a war on poverty. There is a war on poor people. And that's really the problem that we don't really address as much in this nation. When we talk about income inequality, we talk a lot about the middle class. And that's, look, the middle class is one of our engines of growth. But the thing is that we don't talk enough about poor people and how to actually elevate them from being poor into the middle class. We need more people in the middle class. We also need to protect the middle class, but laws like this are targeted strictly towards the poor. Now, no doubt, this will hit the middle class as well. People who earn $50,000 or more are getting hit with $200. That's also a disaster. It also affects them very much. Now, these Republicans, this guy, Click Bishop, he can't say, look, I'm looking out for the middle class. You know exactly who he's looking out for when he tries to push a bill like this. And look, to their credit, some of the Republicans are like, hey, let's not do that. Let's cut instead. Well, what are they going to cut? What do you think you're going to cut? Education. It's always the first thing to go. And then services for the poor. So no matter what way you look at it, or however you try to solve this budget mess, the poor are always going to be the first that are going to get screwed.